Hey everyone, it's Raghu back with Rolling. Mind rolling. God, we haven't described or defined that in a very long time. Actually, some of what we're going to talk to my guest today, whose name is Lama Rod Owens, and has a really quite great book, The New Saints, it's called, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But welcome, Rod.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh, now Lama Rod is very close to someone that many of you know, and you know of Lama Rod with Spring Washam. They do a podcast on Be Here Now Network, and so I thank Spring for introducing us. Actually, um, okay, so there's a lot going on in the book, and
Mhm.
and you represent many different things, and but can you tell a little bit about how you arrived? That's one way of putting it, or even just knowing, wow,
Yeah.
okay, there is a way to transform. I can be
Mm.
happy, is what I always say. I was so miserable, Lama, when I was a
Yeah.
teenager, and I got saved. Actually, for me, it was music. There was like
Mhm.
John Coltrane saved me. How about that?
Oh, wow.
Live
Well,
in
he's a
a
spiritual being.
he was certainly to me the most spiritual artist, musician,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've met a lot of them too. He was, so this was, I was 16, 17 years old in a
Yeah.
club in Montreal, and he
Wow.
played my favorite things with the
Oh,
soprano, with Elvin
right.
Jones and McCoy Tyner and Jimmy Garrison.
Mhm.
I got that. I mean, and that was my first out of body experience. No drugs, no nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was very
Yeah.
fortunate. So now your story.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have very similar experiences with Alice Coltrane.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. When I discovered Alice Coltrane, I was like, oh, where am I going? Right. Um, But yeah, I mean, when was the first time I experienced that transformation or potential for transformation? That's a really good question. I think that I would say first, I for most of my life, even from a very early age, was very concerned with people. I was concerned with suffering. I was concerned with people being happy.
Mm,
Because I think I felt like there weren't a lot of people that were happy around me, right? And I just remember at an early age just feeling like, oh, my job is to help
really?
people be happy.
Wow.
Oh yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I wanted to be so many different things growing up, but it was always about science and mental health. Right. I thought I wanted to be some kind of a scientist, and then I was like, no, I want to be a psychiatrist. Right. Like I was always thinking about that.
wow.
Um, I would say my moment of transformation, I had quite a few in college. Right. Back then, I wouldn't necessarily call them mystical experiences or spiritual experiences, but they were looking back,
Mm,
right? I spent much of my college career as an activist. That's when I really began to understand what it meant to take action, what it meant to take a stand, right? To speak my mind, right? I was very good at speaking my mind. And I remember as a student, I was a student writer working for the paper, our student paper, as a columnist.
mm,
And I had this column, and I used this column to talk about everything that I felt was wrong about the campus and the world. A lot of people did not appreciate that,
no.
and no,
No. Well,
I wrote. a column that was highly controversial about sex on
Oh,
campus. So at a normal liberal university, no one would have ever paid that
uh-huh.
column much attention. It was well written and funny, right? But I went
Where
to
where is this? Where? Yeah,
so
what's the
this was
school?
Berry College in Northwest Georgia.
Uh-huh.
Berry College, very conservative, non non-denominational Christian, right? But still quite, I wouldn't say fundamental, thankfully, you know, but conservative,
Mhm.
right? And I just came out in the paper with this column and it really changed my life. Like it was the first time that I had to really stand by what I believed in, which felt very lonely and isolated.
Hmm.
And from that experience, it was like, no, this is your life. This is what you will be doing, right?
Hmm.
Is speaking out, is having an opinion, having a point of view, right? And you will defend this point of view
Hmm.
and you will lose things, right? And this is going to be your life because there are people depending on you to articulate these ideas, these thoughts, because they need you to remind them that they're not alone, right?
Hmm.
And that was the beginning of my activism, right? But that was looking back, I think one of the most profound, significant spiritual experiences because I really think it was about this embodiment of love. Like this is what love looks like, even in a place where, you're being told to be quiet,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And so it changed the trajectory of my life, I
Mm.
think,
Wow.
right? And
That
that led
so no, it's something just occurred to me that
yeah,
so you're talking about love.
yeah,
Love is reminding people they are not alone. It's
yeah,
just isn't that
exactly.
it?
That's it. Like it's meeting people where they are, right? It's holding people, tending to people. And it was clear that like this would be how I was one of the many ways I think I would tend to people is through my writing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
here we are.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, you've had quite an evolvement though from those
Mhm,
days,
mhm.
all the way. Lama is a llama. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not, I love what you
Is
say in the
that
book. Somebody says, Lama, what are you, some kind of,
yeah.
four-legged beast or something or some bullshit?
Yeah, yeah. That's an old joke
Oh,
that I was
yeah.
like, "Let's
All
put it to bed now."
right. That's great. But no, please do say a little bit about.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think it's something. I mean, I think it happened to many of us,
Yeah.
and I'm of an older
Mhm,
generation, and it
mhm,
happened in the 60s and 70s, and that was we decided to leave something behind.
mhm.
Not in a really a very conscious way. And
Right.
I only found out what that really meant
Mhm.
many, many, many years later.
Yeah.
And
Mhm,
actually, I'll tell you the story or everybody.
mhm.
There was we had several mentors when we were in India with
Uh-huh.
Nimkaroli Baba and
Mhm,
Ramdas.
mhm,
And one of them was, we did a film on, by the way, everybody, Brilliant Disguise. It is a really great film that
mhm.
shows the extraordinary life of this guy who was a teacher. He was the headmaster of a boys' school in Nainital up in the Himalaya. And
Mm.
yet he was a knocked out yogi that
Ah,
around Maharaj, around anywhere, he would go into
nice.
samadhi.
Yeah.
Deep, deep, no pulse, no breath, all of
Mhm,
it. And so he was a very, very important figure in our lives, to say the very
mm,
least.
mhm.
Anyhow, I happened to take my mom to India. It was a great thing.
Ah,
It was so great. And we went on a pilgrimage with this being. His name was K.C. Tuari.
Mhm.
And we went way up into the Himalaya, and to a place where even the Mongols didn't find the temples and then,
Mhm.
carve them up and, do what they
Mhm.
did.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of a lost place. Anyhow, one night, we're just sitting around, three of us, and he says, you really, you can't leave your your religion of origin.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
can't do that. Yes, it's great to do what you're doing, and
Mhm.
well, obviously with Hinduism and Buddhism, he said that directly. But he says, you might know a prayer. I'd love to hear a prayer. So I'm Jewish, right? So a
Mhm.
prayer in Hebrew. My mother wasn't any, she was a very cultural Jew, which I'm sure you know what
Mhm.
that is.
Mhm.
But I had gone to parochial school, was half Hebrew, half English. I mean, I was really
Mhm.
indoctrinated, which is why I got angry. But I said, okay, Mom, we know this prayer, Ein Keloheinu. There is
Yeah.
only the one. There's
Mm.
nothing but that one. I mean, it's
Wow.
actually a great prayer. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu.
Mhm.
He went into samadhi,
Wow.
Tuari.
Wow.
And my mother said, what happened? She'd never seen anything like. I said, it would be okay. We just got to sit here for a bit, which we did. And then boom. And that was the moment that I realized that, yes, there's no leaving the connection that we have to what we got born into this
Mm.
incarnation with, right?
Yeah.
And you really, with great uh, style, Lama,
Mhm.
you really talked about that in
Yeah.
terms of, so yeah, tell us about that in
Mhm.
relation to your Christianity and how you moved into Buddhism.
Yeah. I grew up in Christianity, particularly the Black Church, Black Southern Church.
Mm.
My mother is a minister. And she was a minister for the United Methodist Church, and she just recently retired.
Oh,
So I mean, I was deep, deep in church, but in a way, very much like you, like cultural Jewish identity, there was something that was very cultural about my relationship to Christianity. When I say cultural in this context, meaning that it's not that I was going around identifying myself as a Christian or having an inherent belief in God, but it was just what we did.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
this is what we did. This
yeah.
our culture, history, everything and was mixed together, right? So I held that. I held the cultural, and part of the cultural holding was that of liberation, Black liberation,
Mm,
theology, Black liberation, um, philosophy, the prophetic tradition, right? As Cornel West talks about. And so I held that as part of my lineage, that we're trying to get free, that God is on the side of the most oppressed. That's what I held. And so it supported me in my activism, right? And so after I finished college, I moved to Boston. I joined a Catholic worker community, or a community in the tradition of the Catholic worker
mm,
movement, right? Called Haley House. And traditionally, the Catholic worker movement was radical Catholics, many convert Catholics, but radical Catholics trying to embody a very particular path of Jesus, the radical activist political path of Christ, right? And they, in the early part of the movement, would live together, would do service work together, would do activism, organizing work together, but you lived in community. Community was the foundation of this lifestyle. So I moved to a community like that in Boston, and loved it. But most of the community members were Buddhist. right? And many others, like there were many religions and paths
Right,
represented,
right.
in the wider community. But many were Buddhists, and which is really interesting because my first introduction to Buddhism was through justice work, not through a practice context.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so my
Yeah.
mentor there who founded the community in the 60s continues to be a very advanced practitioner and revered.
Mm.
Right. And but I hated meditation. So that was the other thing. So that was keeping me from actually participating in the more religious, spiritual side of the community. But I was very fortunate that my life began to fall apart. Um,
Interesting statement
yeah,
right
yeah,
there.
yeah, very fortunate. Mental, emotional breakdown, trauma, depression. Um, and it was like I hit a wall. Right. And I'd been in therapy. Therapy didn't seem to be working well. And so some of my friends suggested that I should just try, medications, right? And something when that was first suggested, something in my body really just revolted. Right. And that's not to say that like I am pro medication, I'm pro anything that helps us to establish balance and stability and connectedness. And some of us, really benefit from that. But what I'm
Hmm.
really trying to say, just to get clear, is that like that choice for me felt like not the choice. Right? In that moment for me.
Yeah.
And so, but I promised myself that I would continue to search for my practice, my modality. And when it seemed like things were getting worse, then I would seriously consider, medications, right? I didn't have to keep looking for much longer because I met a psychic healer right soon
Yeah.
after, and this healer was like, "Listen, your path is the spiritual path, right? And it's time for you to get on it,
Hmm. Really?
right?" Oh yeah, yeah. And so she encouraged me to meditate, to begin really taking meditation seriously, which I hadn't before because I hated it, right? I just couldn't sit and meditate. It was, it was too much. But I started up again. I'm still in my early 20s, right? So I started practicing again, and with the help of this healer, really started moving through a lot of trauma, a lot of woundedness, started doing a lot of intensive healing on top of a lot of change in my life,
Hmm.
right? So it was a complete lifestyle change, right? And as I was moving through the process, I was like, okay, Buddhism seems like this is it, right? And as I deepened my practice, what became clear, this is like the first year and a half, by the way, right?
Mhm.
As I deepened my practice, I said, okay, I am going to become a teacher,
Hmm.
right? I had a mystical experience, and I had been having a couple in this period by now. But in this experience, this voice downloaded in my head, and told me that this was what I was going to do, that I was going to become a teacher, that I was going to spend a few years of my life being a monastic, and that I would be able to really help people who really identified with me, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And that was it. And I
Mm.
was like, okay, great, let's do it. And then I was able to find my root teacher, Lama Rod Owens, who at that time lived in the Hudson Valley outside of New York City,
Yeah.
the monastery he
He
founded.
he
Mhm.
loved Neem Karoli Baba.
Yes, yes, right. And I would return back to Neem Karoli Baba. I didn't know Neem Karoli Baba then, but I would come back to him in a really significant way in the future.
Mm.
But yeah, I found myself practicing with him and moved to the monastery and was admitted into the traditional training to become a teacher in the Tibetan lineage, Tibetan
How old were
school.
you? then?
I was 20. I moved to the monastery when I was 27. And I started 3-year retreat when I was 28.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And traditionally, right, for Tibetan traditions to become a Lama, we enter into a almost a 3.5 year cloistered retreat, silent cloistered retreat.
Hmm.
And I did that from the ages of 28 to about 31, 32.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and after I finished the retreat, I was authorized as a Lama, and Lama means teacher or guru, and was authorized to teach, you
Hmm.
know.
But, talk
Mhm.
about I mean, it's obviously very personal, but your relationship
Yeah,
with Christ
yeah,
as it had been, and
mhm,
then there was, I mean, I feel like that connection was very strong,
yeah,
and then you moved away from it and
mhm,
then came back to it later. That's
yeah.
kind of what I was referring to. Is it true?
Well, I would say I didn't have much of a relationship with Christ or much of an understanding really of Christianity or God growing up. It wasn't really explained to me well. Right? And
Uh,
so when Buddhism came about, I was like, oh, great. Like, I understand this. But,
yeah, yeah.
the real profound thing that happened was that Buddhism taught me to understand Christianity.
Hmm.
It gave me a different lens to understand the Trinity and to understand, you know, this idea of a God, right? And it gave the framework that Buddhism gave me was a liberating framework. That
Hmm.
God wasn't this like old white man sitting in the sky, randomly blessing people and like randomly like harming other
Mm,
people.
mm,
God wasn't a person. God was this experience, and that
mm,
we were expressions of that experience, right? This liberated, awakened experience that transcended the complexities of the struggle of suffering and duality and ego, right? And I
mm.
was like, oh, okay, I get that. Like, I get that kind of God. And Buddhism
Yeah.
reintroduced me to Jesus, right? And in a way that I felt Jesus was accessible and human, someone who loved the world so much, right? He wanted people to be free and he made certain choices to bring that about, right? He was countercultural, right? He adopted these countercultural practices of the
Mm,
time to bring back to his home root community, right? And was considered this, you know, obstacle, like a terrorist, you know? Um, and when I came back to that understanding of Jesus, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I get that, like, everything isn't this intense, mystical, transcendent experience. There is the realness of being in the world, being in a body, right? Risking harm, for choosing to really want to love people when there are so many people who are against that kind of love. Right. So I understood that. And I, in a real way, didn't feel so alone anymore.
mm,
Right. It's like growing up with something, and you just don't realize what it is, but it's precious and amazing and powerful. But you're just like, oh, whatever. Right? And then you realize what it is, and then it transforms everything. Like it's like you awake from a dream,
mm,
right? From this
yeah.
cloud of distraction, you know? But it
Mm,
wasn't that, it was more than just Christ and Christianity. It was really the lens that I started practicing and using for all spiritual paths, right? It wasn't to devalue or to, I don't know, deconstruct any other path, but it was just the lens that helped me to get into, right, what I felt was the nature, the essence of
yeah.
that path,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it reminds me. Ram Dass
Mhm,
mentioned once he went and did these very lengthy insight vipassana
mhm,
courses
mhm.
in in the East, maybe in Thailand, and people were like, "Well, your tradition is bhakti yoga. What are you
Mhm.
doing?" And so he said, "Let me tell you that the way through that practice, it opened up a whole new doorway, or not opened. It was already open. It just increased the spaciousness of the devotional, heart-centered path." He said that, and our whole tradition is very much, I repeat this a lot, is very much about, yes, the path of the heart, bhakti yoga, but it's also Buddhist discriminating wisdom, which is why at all these retreats, we have you all Buddhists come to them. You'll have to come to one of them soon too,
Yeah.
Rhonda Lama. Yeah. So yeah, that um, it's amazing. Yeah, that perspective which you described getting into that applies to just anything, any tradition, really. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's I love that. That's so great, really. Um, and Christ, I don't know if you know this, another well-worn story, but we went to India with Ram Dass when he went back the second time, and we ended up with Maharaji, and a lot of Jewish people were there, Lama.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ram
Mhm.
Dass is Jewish, Krishna Das, me, Ramesh, who wrote co-wrote the memoir with Ram Dass and others. I mean, it was interesting for us,
Yeah.
like, what? He never ever said a word about Jews, ever. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
not Moses, not Jews, but like Moses, all he talked about, I swear to God, was Christ. And I'd be like, wait a minute. He said, "Where's your cross?" I go, "Cross? I'm Jewish. I don't know." I went out and got one, let me tell you. But fortunately for us, and this is the famous story of I asked him how to meditate, and he said, meditate like Christ. When he was nailed to the cross,
Wow.
he felt love, not pain.
Um,
So Ram Dass came that night, and I told Ram Dass, and a few of us sitting around, he wasn't there that day, but he was there to come the next day. I said, we have a more convivial relationship. Maybe you could say, how does Christ meditate? And he did that, and Maharaj just his head went back, his eyes closed, and there was nothing for a couple of minutes. And then tears came down his cheeks, and he said, "You don't understand. You don't understand." Over and over, he said that. He never died. He never
wow.
died. He lives in everyone's hearts. He was lost in love with every sentient being. He didn't say the word sentient, but basically. And from that moment on, that was it. I mean,
Wow.
we had darshan in India. It's called. We were in that presence of what that means. In their tradition, it's Hanuman,
Mhm.
the monkey god, right?
Mhm.
And which he would say, yeah, no, they're the same. It's service,
Yeah.
love,
Yeah.
devotion.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, I don't know how any of that happened, but as I was reading what you were going through, I
Mhm.
felt very simpatico, for sure.
Mhm. Mhm. There's these great spiritual beings who connect us to the oneness of
Yeah,
everything. They
yeah,
help us to remove these blocks,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's
Yeah, that's why
so
I began
great.
to feel like as I moved deeper into this path, I was like, oh, there's a commonality here. Like I felt like so many of these paths were pointing to the same direction, pointing back
Mm,
to the same experience.
yeah,
Right. I'm
yeah,
grateful for that. I'm grateful for this understanding, right?
mm,
Because it helps me to celebrate and to appreciate the value and the uniqueness
mm,
of other spiritual paths,
yeah,
right? Even though I wasn't taught that, quite frankly. We were taught to be purists, and separatists,
Yeah.
but it just never made sense to me.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, definition here,
Okay.
because the
Mhm.
book, so Rod's book is The New Saints, everybody?
Yeah. Oh, look at that. It's well marked. Sweet.
Yes.
I
uh, yeah, and
think it, yeah.
let me read something, because now we're going to define what the new saint is, and Rod
Yeah.
is going to do that. Lama's going to do that. I am not a new saint, you say, because I feel divine or extraordinary. I'm a new saint because I have chosen to give a shit about myself and everyone around me, and because I have figured out much of the work I need to do to help people experience the freedom to be their
Mhm.
most authentic selves. I do that work, and I keep showing up to do that work. Well, I love this, Ron.
Yeah.
This is, but okay. First, I have to say, okay,
Mhm.
when you say that word, and when I look at the cover of the book, and saint, we what we have done with words, English words, all the way to
Mhm.
love, it all denotes transactional stuff
Mhm.
in
Uh-huh.
one way or the other. It's
Mhm.
amazing. We are amazing how we've
Mhm.
done that. And look what we've done.
Yeah.
Here we are. And we did it.
Yeah.
It's not out of the blue.
Mhm.
Anyhow, but in the tradition, of course, going to India, there's saints everywhere. They're like
Yeah.
saints, and talk about saints. And to me, it always meant somebody who does great works
Mhm.
to support other people through
Uh-huh.
suffering in both physical and spiritual ways. That
Yeah.
would, general idea. Then the people around Neem Karoli Baba said,
Mhm.
this is not a saint. This is called a siddha, which is
Uh,
somebody who's able, completely non-polarized. There's no more, there's advait,
mhm.
non-dual, but still living in a body with a personality.
Yeah.
That's, that was their description. So I understood that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And now we have the new saints. So talk about the new
Oh,
saints.
yeah. Well, the root of this is really, it reminds me of Jesus and reminds me of this period that we're in right now, this moment in history where there seems to be a lot of Christians, but not a whole bunch of embodiment of Christ.
Yep.
Right? And what I
Understatement might
Yes,
be.
for real. One would argue that it's not Christ that they're trying to embody. But I really, as someone who's been, yes, very concerned with this for most of their lives, I really began to wonder, okay, what's going on here? What is this separation? And it was a separation. I think you can put someone on a pedestal so much, you develop this belief that like there's no way you can be like them. And
Mhm.
I think that was the opposite of what Jesus and I believe many great spiritual beings were here to do. They were here to remind us that indeed we are like them. We're all like each other. We all possess this capacity, this potential to remember our divinity. But I think in terms
Mhm.
of Christianity, I think Christ has been put on this pedestal and it's so high that no one really believes that it is possible to embody Christ, right? And I think in the space that people find themselves in, the space that opens up between themselves and Christ, there's this longing. And I don't think people know how to articulate that longing. So it
Mhm.
feels like suffering, it feels like tension or judgment, right? And I think that like people are really unconsciously reacting to like that brokenheartedness of believing that they can never be like Christ. So they've chosen something else and called it Christ-like, which seems more accessible, right? And so when I was really sitting with the formation of this book, which was during the quarantine, 2020,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, after the murder of George Floyd, people were back on the streets, with the renewed movement for Black lives. And also my last book, Love and Rage, had come out as well.
Mm.
So it was like a very intense period. On top of that, I was in the media quite a bit, trying to be a good Buddhist, right? But I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to show up and tell people to calm down. Instead, I would show up, in these interviews talking about how we needed to act up even more. And so the people were very confused about that. But in that kind of activism I was doing in the media, I kept thinking, you know what? There needs to be some type of guide or a resource for people that
Mm.
helps them to reclaim what I have started to reclaim, right? That
Mm.
I feel close to Christ because I realized what Christ was trying to do, and I accepted the challenge, right, of beginning to own my own divinity, my own sacredness, right? And I looked at all these spiritual traditions, primarily focusing on Christianity and Buddhism and so forth, right? The paths that were closer to me. And I said, what are these people trying to do? Right. And this and exactly what you've shared. Like, I think that the most important spiritual, practice is care, compassion, love.
Mm.
Like, I think that's the common expression across many paths, that a saint is defined by the depth of their care for
Mm.
others, right? I was
Yeah.
like, that's the saint, right? But knowing the baggage that we have around sainthood, I said, okay, let's call it a new sainthood. So this
Mm.
opens the door for people to reclaim sainthood, to redefine it. That's based primarily on caring for themselves and caring for others. Right. And not just caring, because, a lot of people care, but they don't do anything. Right. Also, why we're in this period right now in this country. So not only should we care, we should do like the great saints did in the past. They worked. They figure out what their work was, what they were here to do, and they did it. Right. Right. And then they kept doing it.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
was like, that's the new saint. And that's
Mm.
where the book started, was that definition.
Mm.
Right. But it really actually began even earlier, a little earlier, not much earlier, with Tina Turner,
Hmm.
with her song from Mad Max, Beyond the Thunderdome, We Don't Need Another Hero.
Mm.
And I
Oh.
remember, I think this was right after she transitioned. I forget when exactly she transitioned, maybe 2019, 2020. But listening to that song, and something just struck me. It
Mm.
was like, oh, we don't need another hero. We are the hero. Like
Mm.
community, the collective. We
Yeah.
have to save ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's
so that was another root of
yeah.
the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The coming Buddha is the Sangha."
That's right.
So that's
That's
exactly
right.
what you just expressed. And I say some of the most important work that we do,
Mhm.
representing Ram Dass's teachings and so on, is around community, is
Yeah.
around bringing people together. And then for us, it's not us and them. It's just one big us. The reminder is so powerful. That is such a beautiful way to get deeper and realize that we are not separate, for
Right.
sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Here's something. I mean, time is flying, but I wanted to definitely get this in. This. Let's see. Where is it? We're talking about the current situation, which the apocalypse is what I'm speaking to. You bring it up here, right? Um, but you do a twist
Hmm.
on it that
Hmm.
not leaving everyone
Yeah.
with this horrific, depressive
right?
feeling, which many
Yeah,
people absolutely are going through right now,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know? So yeah,
absolutely.
give us
Uh-huh.
the not all the levels, not
Mhm.
just
Right.
right.
Well, I I have the fortune of having gone to divinity school and did a little bit of biblical studies, right? It
Mm,
wasn't my main focus. I went to divinity school, yes, to learn, more about Buddhism and so forth, but also to like really do my best to dispel some of the things I grew up in Christianity with, right? And apocalypse is one of those things
mm,
that I began
really?
to debunk. Because apocalypse isn't about the end of the world. I think we think that's Armageddon, right? Apocalypse is revelation. Apocalypse is unveiling, right? It's telling the truth. Why apocalypse carries so much weight is because when you're so far away from the truth can hurt. The truth may require significant adjustment and transformation to come back into alignment with it,
Mm,
right? So what we're experiencing now, as I call this moment and age of apocalypse, is that we are being shown the truth,
mm,
right? Like we're
mhm,
being asked to return back to a place we've gotten very, very far from, right? And I think that is returning back to a place where we have communities and cultures of care, where people's well-being is prioritized, not capitalism, not other systems, but people's wellness, people's safety, right? Is being centered. Like, and we have to return back to that kind of care, which again is for
mm,
me the highest spiritual expression, right?
yeah,
Um, that means that like all the stuff that we've created and built and constructed maybe needs to collapse, maybe needs to be
yeah,
demolished. And that
yeah.
feels like dying, right? When you're
Mhm,
so self-identified with being, a man, right? And realizing that manhood is so deeply, created or indoctrinated by patriarchy,
mm,
right? And to
yeah,
let patriarchy die means it feels like you're dying, right? And that's what we're moving into,
mm,
right? So I think there's a real grief
yeah,
of whereas this grief is like an acknowledgement that we are having to let go
yeah.
of something we thought we were. Yeah.
Yeah. I love actually, to begin with, you say we're not experiencing the end of the world, as you
Right.
just suggested, but
Yeah.
experiencing the end of some provocative
Hmm.
and desperately enduring lies we have
Yeah.
told ourselves.
Yep.
And I read that and I thought, yeah, I don't know, somehow I was led to think about the environment and my
Yeah.
relationship there.
Yeah.
Deep lying and
Yeah.
hypocrisy in many spots,
Exactly.
and and there is grief there. There is the feeling of why, and in my case, why haven't I turned that around? Why am I so nonchalantly moving
Yeah.
forward?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the term is really well taken, Lama,
Yeah.
the apocalypse. Yeah. Um, We're confronting truth about ourselves and our relationship to death and dying, to systems and institutions of violence, to transhistorical trauma, to the
Mhm.
health of our planet, which we just referenced, to capitalism, and ultimately to the fact we can no longer continue living like we have in the past. Real truth is unrelenting, like the sun piercing the clouds on an overcast day, and it doesn't go away just because we can't handle it.
Yeah.
Great
It's like
stuff,
a
man.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think that feels hard for people right now, like the unrelenting truth or the nature of things, because we're running out of ways to distract ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? we can't say, oh, we have a great government or we have a democratic government, and we're no, that's no longer the case, right? And it's hard. It's just hard.
Yeah. I did a podcast, Lama, some time ago with a wonderful Tibetan, a Lama. And his biggest words of advice, he said, don't struggle with the struggle. Isn't that good?
Wow. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I loved
Yeah.
it too. Don't struggle with the struggle. And you do talk about this. So there's many, these are, I would call, extraordinarily helpful either practices or perspectives that are suggested in this book that are really, really great. And practice is not easy and often involves a fair amount of struggle. That's why I immediately thought of that as soon as I read that. Many of us are not interested in struggling, but in my practice, I appreciate struggle because it is how I register the effort I invest into getting free. That's a big commitment.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, the struggle. I mean, there's no transformation without wrestling with something. There has to be an engagement. That engagement, I think, is in a way getting things clear. Right. And a lot of us don't know how to struggle like this. And I think we're in this period where people are being invited to struggle in this very new way,
Mm,
and I think people are having to learn how to do that because it's just, you're struggling with everything at once. Everything
mm,
is changing. And I love that wisdom from that Lama too. It's like you have to let go of struggling with the struggle. Like you have to let go of the
yeah,
resistance
yeah,
to the struggle and just lean into it. Right. And trust that it can change you. Right.
yeah, yeah. Trust that it can change you is right.
Mhm.
That's a big thing too. In
Yeah.
my own relationship with people coming to retreats and so on, we talk a lot about
Yeah.
trust. It's that really generates a connection to one's intuition, which is probably
Mhm.
one of the most important things. And probably we could say that's part of the magic of the new saint, which you talk about
Mhm.
too, right? You talk about
Mhm.
a couple of practice,
Mhm.
um, awakened care,
Yeah.
and we've been talking about that,
Mhm.
which is an expression of love and compassion for
Mhm.
ourselves and others.
Mhm.
And then the development of the capacity to disrupt habitual reactivity
Yeah.
to everything that arises for us by choosing to experience what arises for us, which helps us transition into a new place of responsiveness. In fact,
Yeah.
people say to me, "You've been doing this decades, and since at Neem Karoli, blah blah, all that.
Yeah.
What's the big change?" And I Ram Dass was also asked a similar question,
Mhm.
and no, all the neurotic tendencies are all still intact. He called them, well, they're now just little schmooze, is how he put it. And I would say to people, yeah, okay, the time of reactivity has reduced
Mhm. Yeah.
enormously from many decades ago, and as
Yeah.
time went on, and that's what you're speaking to, I think here, right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a space that opens up for us to make a choice,
Mm,
right? And it doesn't feel like there's a lot of space for a lot of folks. So the absence of space really yields a reactive experience,
right. Yeah.
which is the huge blessing for me. Like I'm so grateful for space.
Mm,
Right? That I don't
mm,
have to just react to everything that comes up in my mind, everything that comes up in the world. Like I get a beat, I get a pause
mm,
to
mm.
get something else into that space,
Yeah.
right? Instead of just a
Pause.
reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring some, I mean, there's so many things, and I wish we had, we'll have to do a couple of more podcasts. Um, but spiritual loneliness. I mean, I think
Yeah.
this is kind of important because people do, when they first realize, okay, there is a path here for transform. I can be happy,
Yeah.
and I pursue this and work on finding out who I really am, inner inquiry, etc.
Hmm.
Things change,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then every, people around you, you had
Hmm.
maybe talk about that because I think it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my obstacles or experiences when you start making different choices about love and care, and you start taking these things seriously. You realize that, like, you may be around people or in community with people who don't hold the same values. Right. I think for a little bit, like it will feel very isolating, very lonely, right? Until you come into real spiritual community, right? Where people are reflecting these same values back to you. And this is
Yeah,
why
exactly.
spiritual community is extremely important,
Yeah.
because the spiritual path is very lonely to a real extent. Yes, I may be in community with folks, but I'm still having to make my own choices about how to get free, right? Like no one can carry me over the finish line of liberation, right? I have to continually consent to that, right? But I can be inspired and supported by others who are making the same choice,
Mm,
right? As me, right?
yeah. Yeah. Very important. It
Yeah.
really is. I, I, we just talked about it before, but I really
Uh-huh.
love this term, awakened care.
Yeah.
Let's go into that a little bit more and
Mhm.
related to seva, to service,
Uh-huh.
and what that really means. It is
Yeah.
not a one-way street of
Yeah.
dropping cans of beans off, and okay, it is not.
Right.
Talk about that awakened
Um,
care.
I mean, awakened care from is as I point out in the book, right, is that it's a coming together of love, compassion, and joy,
Mm,
right? Rooted in emptiness, right? Emptiness is the foundation from which everything arises, right? And so it's based upon the Buddhist notion of bodhicitta, which is the awakened heart mind,
heart,
right?
mind.
Which
Yeah.
is the deep aspiration to free all
Mm,
beings,
yeah.
right? But when I was thinking about how to translate bodhicitta, right? I wanted to be practical and realistic for people, and to define it a little more, but also to really articulate my experience of bodhicitta. And I said, well, my experience of bodhicitta is all of this. It's joyful, it's loving, it's compassionate. I feel the expanse and the boundlessness of emptiness when I'm grounding myself in this aspiration, right? And so bringing it together, I said, okay, this comes together to create an awakened kind of care, not just a regular care, but like an awakened care that takes into consideration the suffering of all beings, that wants all beings to be safe, that drives and motivates us to be agents of liberation, but to do it in a way that it doesn't even feel like work, but there's a joyfulness
Mm,
here because we're doing what we are supposed to be doing. This is our work, right? To come back into alignment with that. And so that awakens into this expression of just profound benefit for all beings, not just the beings you like, but all beings.
mm, mm. That's quite important right there.
You're right. You're right.
Start practicing metta, everybody.
Well, and
Um,
that's the danger of this is that, like, and I tell people all the time, listen, don't try this work unless you're willing, or unless you're ready to want everyone to get free, including the people that you can't stand,
mm,
right? Because everyone has to get free. That's
yeah,
it. That's the
yeah.
heart of this.
Yes, no, we get free everybody that's hanging in my neighborhood, in my house.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get them all. Very difficult. This is all very difficult. This is like Neem Karoli Baba said to Ram
Mhm.
Dass. Um, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth. And he said, the truth is I don't still love everyone. And exactly that. And it took many years, all the way towards, when he was in Maui. And he became that much more, of course, that he was pointing to it before that. But how do you, okay, awakened care,
Um,
putting it into action.
mhm.
And now I think that we know that it's this, you've got to get your heart cleaned up before you can be effective in any way, but you
Sure.
can't wait till that heart gets cleaned up
Right.
or ain't nothing going to happen. So it's,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I mean, my feeling is these two things need to happen at the same time. But how
Right.
do you put it into effect?
It's like building the plane as you fly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, like we have to start practicing this to begin with. It's not something that I can just pull off on the spot, right? I have to have time to really work through this practice. And then once I get a good handle on it, then in the world putting this into practice. Because for me, this is awakened care, the practice of awakened care, as I point out in the book, is something that awakens a very authentic state for
Mhm.
us. And it
Yeah.
is from that state that we're trying to be in relationships with others. It's not that like I'm channeling awakened care like magic. It's like, no, I am situated in awakened care. And that helps me to be of benefit to others.
Mm,
Right. It takes me out of like
right.
my selfishness. It takes me out of my fear, right? It holds all of that and allows me to make a choice to center what other folks need in the
Mm.
moment.
I laughing because you're just expressing something that I did an audio book with a friend, Duncan Trussell, who's
Oh
well,
yeah, I know Duncan.
Duncan, yeah. The movie of me to the movie of we, and we used ourselves, as examples of how the neurotic tendencies and the habitual patterns that were created in the environment that we grew up with, and then
Mhm.
suddenly realizing, well, wait a minute, there is a way out, and that was the way out. Ultimately, actually, at the end of we put in just a little bit from Ram Dass, and he was talking about uh, compassion and
Okay.
generosity, and that is, I mean, and you're expressing the exact same thing. This is what can bring us out of separateness and into a place where we're not trying to do anything. It is just a natural effect of the reality of who we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh, by the way, at the end of the, uh, I have to mention this. I mean, you obviously met 17th Karmapa,
Hmm. Yep. Many times.
and yeah, and I often tell people that I had I did meet him as well, 17th, in a very informal way, actually, in a hotel at one of the His Holiness Kalachakra from Washington,
Mm.
a long time
Hmm.
back.
Hmm.
Anyhow, I had met 16th Karmapa, and the story is, we were each of us got a chance to go up and stand before him, and he put the kata, the scarf, around us and blessing.
Hmm.
And when I got about 10 feet, I was waiting in line. The line kept moving about 10 feet away.
Hmm.
Suddenly I thought, oh my God. And I thought to myself, this is Maharaji. This is
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, it is true. There
Hmm.
is only that one thing. And it gets
Hmm.
expressed, a little bit differently in different bodies
Hmm.
and personalities, but it was that same thing. When I met the 17th, I thought, wow, this is pretty incredible. This
Hmm.
is how this works. This, you
Hmm.
Tulkus and
Yep.
reincarnates and all this sounds like,
Uh-huh.
storybook stuff. But when you're standing in front of it, and because I had that
Mhm.
moment with his predecessor, it was pretty powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is what happened? You met him and,
Well, it was very much like you're describing. It was like entering into this profound field, I would say, of stillness, where it seems like everything gets clear, everything drops away. There's nothing but this intense presentness. that like the chaos, the drama of everything around you just kind of falls away and you're just in this field, this world. I often say it was like often like entering into the eye of a hurricane, the eye of the hurricane being really still, but everything around
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the eye of the
yeah, yeah.
hurricane just being
Good
swirly.
analogy.
Yeah. And that's what I felt,
Mm,
you know,
mm.
and I
Wow.
felt with all my teachers. Right? And that's what made them my teacher. It was like, oh, you're doing something
Mm.
that I want to learn how to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and also any one of these teachers that is not thinking they're a teacher. Let's start
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
There is an ineffable part of it that
Yep.
yeah, and karma is
Yeah.
involved and all of
Yes.
this. Well, we have to go, but not before. Okay, you have the best definition of God I ever heard. I don't like that word. I keep telling
Uh,
people I can't handle
no.
it. I had a I don't. Do you know who James Finley is? You
I think I've
guys,
heard.
he's
No.
fantastic,
Oh yeah.
mystical. He Thomas Merton. He studied with Thomas Merton.
Oh yes. Yeah.
He's
Yeah. Hmm.
fantastic, and I did a
Hmm.
podcast with him. I loved
Oh
him,
wow.
and he didn't really get after me for I don't like that. He acknowledged it.
Yeah.
There were some issues with there, but here we go. Because okay,
Yeah.
this is Lama Rod. Everybody, I no longer see God as the personification of people's weaponized pain, sorrow, and trauma. God is no longer a psychological terrorist restricting me from the love that I deserve because of my queerness or belief in justice. At this point, I know God as an experience of the essence of all phenomena. God is the expression of my mind, which is to say, the expression of the union of emptiness, space, and energy potential. This
Mhm.
union is, of course, the very state of freedom itself.
Yeah.
That's good, Lama.
Yeah.
Okay, now
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to live with God a little bit more.
Hope others are too.
Yeah,
You know. But
yeah.
I was. I really started experiencing God in different ways when I started practicing the Kashi lineage, which is how I get back to Mindrolling, right? Because Kashi was founded by Majai Sati Bhagavati,
Well, who I
who,
knew well.
yeah, did you? Yeah. And I didn't know her in the body, right? But in Atlanta, here in Atlanta, I started spending time in the community that she founded here in Atlanta with some of her senior students. And it was
Hmm.
with this community that I started experiencing different. I started knowing God in different ways. Like I'd already like developed my peace with God before coming to Kashi,
Mm-hmm.
but then the way this lineage speaks of God, right? It was just a different aspect that I was given permission just to be in and be with,
Mm.
right?
That's fun.
And it was through studying, Ma, that I learned about Ninkuli Baba and just her particular embodiment,
Mm-hmm.
that an embodiment that like I groove with. Like that's who I align with, right? But
Mm-hmm.
as someone training in the spiritual path, I had to do it in a very orthodox, disciplined way. I had to be a monastic. I had to go through that like really cloistered experience for me to emerge back to understand the fluidity of teachers like Ma, for instance, who seem to be all over the place, right?
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Just like out loud, live and in living color, like because of my training, the discipline, like I really get that, what she was doing and the complexities of what she was doing, the same complexities of the 17th Karmapa as well. I think in the book and in all my work, what I'm trying to do is bring out how complexity and particularly humanity can live right alongside of
Mm.
advanced spiritual awakening.
Right
And we
on.
have to bring both of those
Right.
together,
Right
right?
on.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
easy. Yeah, it's easy to get lost in these
Mm.
extraordinary awakened, experiences from these great beings, and they were still human. They
Yeah.
had to
Well,
eat.
yeah.
They had to like negotiate difficult relationships, and they made mistakes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, we're polarized and projecting everything every moment, so
yeah,
makes it quite difficult,
yeah,
you know. So,
yeah.
hey, so wonderful to hang out with you.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Everybody, you go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, and there'll be a wonderful links there
Mm,
to Lama's new book and also website, so you can keep in touch of his doings. And yeah, again, thank you for being here.
yeah, it's been a
Everybody,
pleasure.
we'll see you next week on Mindrolling on go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and all wonderful people, including Spring, Washam, and Lama Rod. They have a podcast, so check it out, and we shall see you later.